From theCUBE studios in Palo Alto and Boston, bringing you data-driven insights from theCUBE and ETR. This is Breaking Analysis with Dave Vellante.
The data industry has arrived at a pivotal juncture that echoes the themes that we've charted in previous Breaking Analysis episodes, from the 6 data platform through the yellow brick road to agentic AI, why Jamie Dimon is Sam Altman's biggest competitor, all the way to the face-off between Benioff and Nadella. Those analyses have chronicled the steady convergence of analytic data platforms such as Snowflake and Databricks, not only with the hyperscalers estates, but increasingly with the operational applications that run businesses. Our research indicates that this merger is not a side effect of Gen AI hype. Rather, it's a structural shift in how enterprises will create value from data and software over the next several decades. Hello and welcome to this week's theCUBE Research Insights powered by ETR. In this Breaking Analysis and ahead of Snowflake Summit next week and the Databricks Data plus AI Summit the week after, George Gilbert and I frame what we see as the industry's central aim. That is the race to evolve from a data platform into a true system of intelligence. Systems of intelligence, as we have argued, are differentiated by their capacity to absorb the fragmented business logic that's scattered across legacy operational estates, harmonize it alongside trusted data, and expose it to agentic frameworks under human supervision. Only when that Rubicon is crossed can enterprises consistently answer at scale the 4 enduring questions of management, i.e., what happened, why did it happen, what is likely to happen next, and most critically, what action should be taken next. George, it's been quite a journey we've been documenting over the past few years, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it only gets more interesting and it's only accelerating.
Well, hyperscalers possess the infrastructure advantage. Vendors such as Salesforce, ServiceNow, Palantir, Celonis, and Blue Yonder, they are actively, in our view, traversing this chasm by embedding intelligence directly into workflows. Whether Snowflake, Databricks, and the other analytical leaders choose to do so, or instead opt to solidify their position as the, let's call it, neutral analytics layer, feeding these emerging systems of intelligence, that's going to be a thread that we examine throughout today's program. So as we head into summit season, our premise is that platform strategy, not incremental feature wars, will separate tomorrow's leaders from yesterday's best of breed specialists. So we welcome you to join us as we dissect 4 examples. We're going to look at Snowflake, Databricks, AWS, and Salesforce in terms of their architecture and how they're extending their franchises, buoying control points, and ultimately addressing board level mandates to operationalize AI at scale. So let's start by framing the shift. George, as you show here in this graphic, a system of intelligence elevates dashboards from merely describing and predicting business performance to diagnosing root causes and prescribing optimal courses of action. That's through a live digital representation of an enterprise, ultimately in real time. And we're not talking about static dashboards here. Rather, the focus is on an operational control plane for a digital business. So George, in your view, is this a prerequisite for true agentic AI? What about the feedback loops that help agents learn? And what ultimately does this mean for platforms like Snowflake and Databricks in terms of moving up the stack and competing not just with each other, but in the domains of firms like Salesforce and ServiceNow?
Okay, you said something that was really critical, which was the feedback loop by which agents learn, and more broadly, a feedback loop by which companies learn with greater fidelity how their business operates so that they can plan interventions that improve operations. So let's walk through this slide in a little more detail. We've always covered the data platform market as a platform for building analytic applications, such as dashboards with business intelligence and machine learning. Business intelligence being the what happened, machine learning, what's likely to happen. And business intelligence, because of the way we were able to gather and analyze the data, we had fairly comprehensive views. As a byproduct of how we had to do machine learning with dedicated feature engineering for sort of each model, we had much more telescopic, narrow views of what's likely to happen. That's on the left side of this slide. And data platforms from Snowflake, Databricks, and the hyperscalers now need to move a lot closer to the operational application estate. When customers increasingly need to automate and operationalize decisions across legacy applications, most particularly, as you pointed out, when they deploy agents. And so that means they need to support, these platforms need to support more than just analytic artifacts, the dashboards. Um, the agents need to be able to perceive the state of the business and how that might change as a consequence of their actions. And that requires a 4D dynamic map of the business that we've been talking about. First, actually, on that interview with Mark Benioff. This 4D dynamic map, it requires a 360-degree comprehensive model of how different business activities affect each other. And we can see an example of this on the right side of the slide, where there are metrics that would otherwise appear in standalone dashboards, but when they're linked, then you can see changes in one metric ripple across to others. And that starts to form, that metric tree is part of a larger system of intelligence that then can answer not just questions about what happened, but why, what's likely to happen, and what should be done. That reflects a model of how your business operates. That's what we're calling a system of intelligence. And the point of showing this is it provides context to understand how data platforms might evolve in light of this larger direction. And the question is, how is this happening and who are the players? So the evolution is the subject of this preview, as you were saying, Dave. And our focus is on some of the traditional platform vendors, Snowflake, Databricks, AWS, and then one relatively new entrant, Salesforce, because they are farther along in highlighting what this transition might look like. And then we can touch on other vendors that are also in the midst of this transition.
Excellent, thank you for that setup. Let's take a look at how the data architecture is evolving. So you can infer from this graphic, the so-called modern data stack, it's splitting or stratifying, if you will, into 3 layers, often referred to as systems of record, those transaction and back office systems of intelligence, and then this emerging systems of agency. And George, the graphic that you created here shows, and that there's that green layer, the business logic and the ML models, they live in a control plane that can be viewed through that metric tree that you were just talking about. So agents query that metric tree for insight and then interact with transactional apps to actually act as systems of agency and execute actions. I mean, essentially what you described before is a state machine of the business in real time. So I'd like you to explain that nuance in more detail.
Okay, so the systems of intelligence highlighted in green, they progressively absorb more and more of the business logic scattered across legacy operational systems. And that sounds like a heretical idea because we spent 50 years building these operational applications to automate or augment more and more of the processes in different functions of the business. But when we did that, we also made this practice of treating data from these applications as a corporate asset. And we normalized it and harmonized it. We put it into data warehouses and then in data lakes. But we have to do the same thing with the business logic. And let me explain why. When we manage and govern business logic the way we do with data, we can change, for example, how we segment customers and automatically have that ripple through all affected analytics and processes. So it would change not just how we see revenue reporting, which is an analytic artifact, but it would change which go-to-market programs move which customers through the marketing funnel, for example. And that's the only way, by harmonizing and unifying this business logic, that's the only way that analytics will be able to inform and align business processes across functions and timescales. Now, another example, This is how Amazon is able to create a 2-week demand forecast that looks out 2 years, and that then they can use that one forecast as an assumption about that affects all their operational planning. So it would affect 3-year strategic capacity build plans, 2-week procurement plans by fulfillment center, all the way down to how they pick, pack, and ship in order to meet delivery and profitability objectives. That's an example of treating all your processes as assets that can be realigned on demand. And that's how enterprises then can harness agents under human supervision to handle these 360-degree questions that you mentioned, like what happened, why, what's likely to happen, and what should be done. And on that slide, that was the control tower on the right side of the slide.
Bring that back up
Now,
if you would, because this, George, sorry to interrupt, but this lays out sort of the TAM expansion possibilities for firms like, Snowflake and Databricks if they choose to do that. I think you're skeptical that they're prepared to do that, but just I want to just harken back to the episode we had juxtaposing Satya Nadella's thoughts that essentially agents replace SaaS, or more Mark Benioff's premise that they sort of orchestrate SaaS platforms. But please carry on.
yeah, no, actually, I'm glad you highlighted that, because what Nadella was saying in the context of this slide was that you would talk, the agents would not talk to this harmonized system of intelligence. They would not even talk to governance metadata in blue for the operational systems. They would not even talk to the operational applications themselves. They would talk directly to the databases of these operational applications. And let me use the same example I think we used with Benioff, which is JP Morgan has something like 6,000 applications that have some attribute of customer in them. A non-deterministic agent is not going to be able to figure out which tables need to be updated of those 6,000. Forget even about reading them. They certainly won't be able to write them. And so you need some deterministic representation of those applications that's harmonized so that the agents can traverse that. And that's that 4D map that we've been talking about. But I also want to highlight something else, which is the legacy applications. That means we're liberating. In the past, we liberated their data and we put them in analytic data estates. That's the data platform. But now we have to start liberating the business logic in them. And that presents actually a fundamental business model conflict for operational application vendors. And this, for example, is why you might see someone like SAP resisting putting all the data from their ERP system in their data cloud, because if they do that and people can execute transactions, let's say through APIs, then that changes their business model from a seat-based one to something much more of a utility consumption-based one. And that is a difficult transition. So it's more like vendors who believe they will use agents that are augmenting people, like with customer service and sales in the case of Salesforce, where they still need the systems of record, but they can add the system of intelligence to augment the end users on the systems of record, and that the agents would augment them. That business model transition is something that's critical. And just to highlight, although we're not going to go into detail this time, if Alex, if you can bring back the slide one more time, I want to highlight that green area, the system of intelligence. That is something that Salesforce, ServiceNow, Palantir, Celonis, and Blue Yonder, building on relational AI. Those are vendors who are bridging the data platform and the system of intelligence space by adding the business logic. We'll go into them in more detail in the future, but the point of bringing them up is this is not a science fiction, sci-fi kind of slide, it's reality that's in progress. And the question is, which vendors are going to compete for that green layer, because that enables the system of agency to be much, much more valuable.
That is a high value piece of real estate, that green block. And one that oftentimes, as you say, people either overlook or basically imply is not needed, but it seems that our premise here is you own that and you're in a very strong position. George, how prepared do you feel, or even whether or not it's their aspiration of Snowflake and Databricks to sort of plant their flags there?
Well, it's a good question. I asked Matej Zaharia about their plans, or what he was thinking about for Unity, which is their metadata catalog, which right now manages all their, is not just their metadata, but the data products, the models, the dashboards, and that can grow into something that represents a system of intelligence. As you put more and more of the data quality rules, you're essentially putting more and more of the business rules that define your business logic. But his thinking last year was that really this would remain a catalog for analytic artifacts. Now that evolution and that thinking may change, because we know that they just entered in an agreement to buy an operational database just a few weeks ago. But we have to see how that thinking's evolved this year. They still seem to believe that relational databases are all you need to support operationalizing analytic recommendations. And I think what we're going to find is this system of intelligence requires a very different type of database, because it manages not just data, but your business logic. And that's something profoundly different from a relational database.
And you're talking graph database, I presume, is the
Yeah.
implication there. But Snowflake is hinting at a metric store with Cortex agents, and that could be like a Switzerland across systems of record. And Databricks with Unity Catalog, with Mosaic AI, they've got their agent play to make Lakehouse the intelligence layer that's inherently governed. And then as you mentioned, you got Agentforce with Salesforce, you got ServiceNow, and others, with embedded metric trees inside their software domains. And then we haven't even talked about the hyperscalers. We will. I mean, Microsoft with Fabric, you got Google with Gemini, AWS, we're going to talk about in more detail. So the landscape is pretty rich, but the market is enormous. Let's dig in, George, to some of the key players here and start by commenting on Snowflake's most recent quarterly earnings print. It was a statement quarter. Ironically, George, it wasn't long ago I was reading, comments on like Seeking Alpha. They were chirping for for Sridhar's head, get rid of him, bring back Frank Slootman. Now they're cheering him on. But Snowflake, they're at a $4 billion revenue run rate now on product side, which is growing in solidly in the mid-20s, which is pretty impressive for a firm this size. So there you can see in the red highlight there, they're projecting $4.3 billion for product revenue in fiscal year 26. And they got strong NRR, revenue retention, and gross margins in the mid-70s. That's because they have to pay cloud COGS, but that's just the nature of the business, cost of doing business there. And their operating margin is ticked up significantly. They're really essentially balancing efficiency and growth. Stock made a big move after this earnings release, up around 14% since the announcement, which I think was last Wednesday, but still below its opening day IPO price, which of course was priced at 120 for friends and family, if you were lucky enough to get that, but it opened up that day at 240, peaked just under 400 and is now sitting at just over 200 per share. And the company's been buying back shares at a significant discount. I think Scarpelli said in the 150s was the average price that they purchased. Now, 4 big themes we heard from management on the call: unified data, basically all architectures, warehouses, lakehouses, data lakes, structured data, unstructured data. They talked about multiple workloads, analytics, data engineering, George, which we're going to talk about, very important. AI, SQL, Java, Python, Scala, serving different personas. They really, try to tap anyway, the data engineers, the developers, the business users, analysts. They talked thirdly about universal governance. In other words, Snowflake handles all the security and privacy and compliance and all the access controls, all the data sharing. AI models, and it's got, of course, regions in all the major clouds. And then finally, they talked about this architecture. They showed it as concentric circles that were evolving. They had the core storage layer. They were famous for separating compute and storage. They've added Cortex AI. They've got managed services around Horizon, which is their governance, their gold standard governance. They didn't really talk about Polaris. I didn't hear much of that on the call. But they got SnowGrid, which is their cross-cloud or what we call super cloud capability. So when the AI wave hit, George, Snowflake, they really weren't even in the conversation. Sridhar was sort of put in place as, I guess I'd say, an AI CEO. And the product advancements have been notable and really accelerating. And here we show data from ETR. It plots net score or spending momentum on the vertical axis by overlap, or that's penetration into the data set, which is a proxy for account penetration. And this is, you can see in that red box, this is for the machine learning and AI sector. And you see Microsoft and OpenAI, they're dominant in the upper right. They got high velocity on their spending on their platforms and deep account penetration. AWS and Google are very formidable and above the red dotted line at 40%. That signifies a highly elevated spending velocity or net score. But look at the firms highlighted. We've underlined them in red. OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, Hugging Face, and yes, Snowflake. None of these names, especially Snowflake, they weren't on the chart. They weren't even on the map in January 2023. Databricks, with its MLOps heritage, of course, was, and it maintains a very highly elevated position on the vertical axis. But impressively, Snowflake is elevated as well, and it's got, as you see in the upper right-hand table, it's got more mentions in the ETR data set, 263 versus Databricks 241, which is why it's further to the right on the x-axis, signifying a little bit greater market penetration, which is somewhat surprising. I also want to show you, here's a breakdown of Snowflake's spending profile from ETR. Let me explain this. It's ETR's net score granularity methodology. The lime green is net new logos. The forest green is spending 6% or more. The gray area is plus or minus 6%, that's flat. The pink is spending down 6% or worse, and the red is churn or isolation of the platform. You subtract the reds from the greens, and that's net score, that's that blue line. Anything, remember, over 40% is highly elevated. The yellow line is penetration into the sector. So you can see Snowflake continues to gain share. Now, we heard from management that they are succeeding at acquiring new logos. And there's something that's evolved over time. So in addition to its product innovations and rush to firm up its AI portfolio with Cortex and other capabilities, some M&A, et cetera, Snowflake has re-energized its go-to-market. They have a new CRO. Mike Gannon came in on March of this year and continued the transition that was started by Chris Degnan. Now, a few years back, CFO Mike Scarpelli advised Wall Street analysts, look, don't freak out about new logos. Snowflake's main emphasis is on existing accounts. It's on consumption, getting clients to consume the product. In fact, their compensation was, I think at one point, exclusively on consumption, not on bookings. So in 2023, I asked then CEO Frank Slootman about this because Snowflake's new logo acquisition was reportedly hitting a wall. Let's listen to Frank's response to my question. Please play the clip.
My understanding is you don't incentivize your sales force to go hard after new logos, rather you're focused on consumption. Is that the right understanding?
No, we do both.
You do?
Yeah, we actually have selling motions that are strictly and only focused on new logos, specific new logos. Not all logos are created equal, so we're very targeted in that way. And then there are the people that are dealing with existing Snowflake accounts. Those are consumption driven and based because they need to be. So two very different models.
Yeah, okay.
Now you can hear what Slootman, he corrected what was then sort of outdated information. It took some time, however, for this model of adding new logos and having a sales force focused on that to kick in. So in the last earnings call last week, Scarpelli said that they've actually changed the compensation from not only just spiffing on bookings, but to a booking quota. So I think there were two, George, $100 million deals that closed last quarter. So those guys, they were happy. That helped retire some quota, I'm sure, $200 million deals. But anyway, Snowflake continues to tweak its go-to-market model, which is the point. So we wanted to see how that played out in the ETR data. Now, you saw on the previous slide, thank you, Alex, for bringing that up. Down at the bottom, you can see the green is not really growing as a percentage of the total, but look at the numbers in the bottom, the ETR sample within the Snowflake survey. These accounts, it's grown from 228 accounts, that's at the very bottom there, N equals 228, in January 23 to 551 in the latest snapshot. So when you do the math on this, it tells an interesting story. So this chart shows the percentage of new logos in the blue bars, which is flattish on the left-hand side. That was the previous, lime green. But on the right axis, when you do the math, the brown line shows the actual number of new logos in the ETR sample, and you can see its trajectory, which really kicked in last spring in the April survey, which is Q2. So, okay, so we wanted to just sort of share that nuance. That's fun with ETR data, I call it. Okay, let's get into the Snowflake platform a bit and unpack it. So Snowflake, they're bringing together metrics, the governance, they've added vector search onto its core database. They're extending all of its, capabilities to Apache Iceberg, or many of its capabilities, I shouldn't say all of them. Cortex agents can query and act on a single policy controlled data plane. So George, describe this in more detail. What does it mean to combine vector and relational in the same engine? How does Cortex support the so-called system of agency that we've been talking about? What about the viz? You asked that question on the upper right here in this chart. Is that a gap that Snowflake has to fill, or can it do so with partners?
Okay, so this is you're setting good context here. Just referring to the slide again, you have to understand that Snowflake's greatest innovation, and the reason they sort of blew competitors off of the cloud platforms initially, was that they built a cloud native data warehouse, which separated compute from storage, so you could independently scale each side. And that gave them a world-beating product. Now, what's happened in the 15 years since is that we now have to separate compute from data, so that multiple compute engines, whether it's data frame Spark processing, or whether it's some open source data transformation engine, such as Spark, can access data independently of the DBMS. And so that was where we saw the proliferation of open data formats, or the creation of open data formats such as Iceberg, and on the Databricks side, Delta tables. And then we had another one called Hootie. So Snowflake is managing that transition. And they bet on the winning table format, Iceberg. But the transition itself is an ongoing process. But the key in mentioning what sounds like sort of an obscure technical thing is that the source of truth about the data changes. It moves from the DBMS, Snowflake itself, to the catalog. And so in Snowflake's case, that's Horizon and Polaris. Now, even if they don't mention Polaris, we have to talk about them together, because Horizon, sort of like Databricks' Unity, is the native catalog for managing your data products, your tables, your dashboards, your metric definitions, your the lineage, your permissions. Now, Horizon is part of the Snowflake DBMS. That's different from Databricks, where Unity is its own standalone product. Now, where Snowflake compensates for that is with the open source Polaris catalog, which is, it's somewhat more limited. It manages technical metadata, which is basically the shape of the data, like schema information, but it also synchronizes permissions with the richer Horizon catalog. So what that means is, for your Snowflake data estate and your Iceberg data, which may extend beyond what Snowflake manages, they will govern both. And that's critical, because you're basically not fragmenting, at least in terms of core governance functions. You're not fragmenting it across what's in Snowflake and what's in the open Iceberg format. Now, Um, it's also worth mentioning, this sounds a little obscure, but Snowflake has realized that capturing the data transformation jobs is what feeds the lineage graph. It said that's where data comes from, sort of by column, and how it's used. And you need that to have confidence in the decisions you make. You need to know that for whether you're tracking the quality of the data, and the veracity of the dashboards or the ML models. And so Snowflake is now capturing, or intends to capture, that transformation data and its lineage graph beyond just what transformation jobs happen in the Snowflake DBMS itself. And that's kind of important. So those are essentially the new system tables for an operational data catalog. But I want to move on to the Sizzle innovation that will probably be getting a lot of airplay next week, which is talking to your data, as Sridhar, the CEO, talks about it. It's text to SQL. This is using an LLM to ask questions in natural language. And this is what they call their Cortex agents. And there are two types of agents. There's Cortex Analyst and Cortex Search. Analyst is for structured data. Search is for the unstructured data that you create vector embeddings for. And the key with the Cortex Analyst is that you need to have the data translated into business terminology. And these are the metrics and dimensions. This is the original semantic layer. It's really a metric layer, but it translates your data into terminology and organizes it so that when you issue natural language queries, something can translate that into SQL. And that's the core of their data agents. That and doing that with the document-oriented information, and essentially being able to link those two types. Now, there's two things to point out here. That's going to look very sexy, and it's hard to get this right. It's not just defining the metrics and dimensions, and they're jumpstarting that by enabling users to import definitions that they created in BI tools such as Looker. And then they're doing something very critical that goes beyond that, which is as you interact, as an end user interacts with the data, they will enrich those definitions that the database is maintaining. But you have to consider there's two questions, which is typically when you ask these types of business intelligence questions, you get a visualization. And doing visualization is a deeply difficult problem to get it right and to get it simple. I mean, we have a whole BI tools category that does this. So one of the questions we'll have going into next week is, where do the visualizations belong? In other words, might not the BI tool vendors be able to do this text to SQL as well, or perhaps better, if they can visualize it? Or do they take the answers coming out of Snowflake and then create visualizations? This we need answers to. And then there's one other thing worth pointing out, which is this answers those questions we raised before, which is what happened. But then if you want to operationalize a decision, then you have to move into another application currently. That's that bridge that we've been talking about, where a system of intelligence takes you from answering a question to operationalizing the decision. We want to see how far they go with that next week.
Yeah, and of course you're going to hear a lot of announcements. I think you're going to see an emphasis on simplification. That's always been their hallmark. I think they've also, from what I understand, have broken through some of the data engineering challenges that you uncovered a few years ago, the TCO challenges that they had, where a lot of customers shared with us that they were taking the hardcore data engineering work outside of Snowflake, doing it in Spark, or Databricks, or both. And of course, we're going to hear a lot about agentic capabilities. All right, let's move on to Databricks. Right here, we show a depiction of the Databricks data and AI platform. Unity is Databricks' bid to make the catalog the authoritative control plane for the lakehouse, governing data products, technical metadata, the so-called AI semantics. So you've got Mosaic powered agents that can reason over and operationalize insights across, as George was describing, any compute engine. This was Ali Ghodsi's mission, was to not just separate compute from storage, but separate any compute engine from any data. May the best engine win was sort of the mantra there. Apply any engine to any data. The Unity catalog sits above Spark SQL, Delta Live tables, and even external Iceberg and Delta storage. So it's governed once and then execute anywhere. And Databricks is integrating the BI and AI metrics definitions with native vector search within the same catalog. So George, explain how this differs from the Snowflake approach. What are the implications for developers? You've cited the same visualization gaps. How much of a big deal is that? And what are the competitive up the stack implications with respect to the likes of Salesforce and others?
Okay, so just the way Snowflake pioneered the separation of compute from storage, as you pointed out, Databricks pioneered the separation of compute from data. And it wasn't exactly done on day one. They had to open up first Delta tables as an open format. And then they had to merge that eventually with Iceberg, because it appears that Iceberg is going to be the winning format. But they bought Ryan Blue's company, Tabular, they were the primary stewards of the Iceberg format. So there's no question they're going to be able to unify those, and they probably have an advantage in making it possible to read and write both formats. And I say read and write. When it was initially announced that they could do both, it was read only on Iceberg. But they have the technical chops to solve that problem. Now, the big issue here, like with Snowflake, is they have text to SQL with their AI BI, where they have metrics and dimensions that are defined. It's a combination of defined top down and learned bottom up from user interaction with the data. That's a theme we'll see more and more, not just in metrics and dimensions, but in capturing the business logic more broadly in a system of intelligence. And of course, they have vector search. But the thing to call out is, so that they have these same text to SQL agents or search agents, not just SQL, but across vector search. The bigger question is, they are building some very, very sophisticated agent development tools. We may find out that these are the most sophisticated or as sophisticated as anyone's out there. And you raised this, Dave, in the beginning when you were setting the context for the whole show, which is agents need to learn from their interactions with the environment. And that means an agent needs to understand when it does something, what was the outcome? Did it move some metric? Did it successfully execute a transaction? And that's why right now there's a blank spot in where we're putting most of that system, where the system of intelligence would belong, because that would create, that's where that model that provides feedback for agents to get smarter. And we don't know what goes in there, and we don't know what they're doing for interacting with the operational systems. That's something we want to find out about. And same question as Snowflake, which is when these agents are used just for querying data, how is the presentation done? Is this something that's sort of a quick and dirty open source sort of visualization library, or is it going to feed something richer like a business intelligence tool? Or will a business intelligence tool issue some sort of natural language SQL to Databricks to return the SQL? These are, some open questions. Again, so this boils down to, are they giving you analytic artifacts and a way to query your data estate about what happened? Or how far do they want to move into this space where they have to cross the Rubicon and start harmonizing application logic to build an end-to-end model of how the business works.
Which appears to be the aspiration of Salesforce, which we'll talk about. All right, let's move on to AWS. We came out of reInvent with, I think, a new picture, and we'll share our views on the architecture we're showing here. They're basically stitching together Redshift, which is their data warehouse, which is rehosted, if you will, for the cloud. Athena, which is their serverless query service. EMR, which is Elastic MapReduce, and Iceberg, under a SageMaker-centric catalog. That was one of the big announcements. Last reInvent was kind of unifying all this, and then they stack Bedrock and Q on top, Q for business, Q developer, and they form a vertically integrated lakehouse, essentially, where agents can answer and act all inside the AWS walled garden. It's an impressive set of capabilities, George, and it's all supported by, you know, what is many consider the gold standard of ecosystems. So in this scenario, SageMaker Catalog is the control plane, and it unifies the technical metadata, the data products, and what AWS calls, I think they call them topics, which is their term for business semantics, what we call the harmonization layer. And it does this across all the AWS, or at least most of the AWS analytics services. Bedrock, which is the model hub, and Q for business, supported by QuickSight, which is their visualization capability, which George has been talking about in the last two slides. And of course, Salesforce has Tableau. And they combine these to form systems of agency. So George, what does it mean that Redshift, Athena, EMR, and Iceberg all live under one roof, and the governance, including agents, are, in theory anyway, tightly coupled to AWS identity and security services? It seems like a major move by AWS to simplify all the Lego blocks and the primitives that we've grown to know over the years.
There was one keyword that you mentioned, which was really interesting. And this was a bit of a revelation for me. I met with a couple of the architects at the Iceberg Summit. And the keyword you used was primitives. And that's been their mantra, especially when you talk to Werner Vogels or listen to his presentations. Amazon is about primitives, not frameworks. Frameworks are when you create an opinionated way of putting building blocks together to simplify developer access. Whereas with primitives, you make a whole lot more use cases possible because you create so much more choice and power. And the revelation for me in talking to these architects was that finally, with the data platform, Amazon reconciled both philosophies. They took the primitives such as Redshift, Athena, EMR, the table format that's on S3, and they put those primitives together into a framework. The catalog is the organizing glue. It was built on DataZone, but essentially this is the business view of all your data. Now they still have many different engines, the compute engines that I just mentioned, and some of those engines have their own data formats. But what they've done to make this from primitives into a framework is that by asking and interacting through the catalog to answer questions, then under the covers, they draw on the right engines to draw and join data from different engines in different formats. That's all transparent to the user. So it finally does look like an opinionated framework. The whole collection is called SageMaker Lakehouse. Now, again, here, like with Bedrock, you would build agents that can query the system about the state of the business. And then separately, you would go through a different set of compute engines to operationalize decisions. They're not yet helping you harmonize going from the analytics to the operationalization of those decisions. But what they do have in Q and QuickSight is the ability to ask questions in natural language. But since QuickSight was built on a business intelligence tool, there should be much richer presentation options when the system returns those answers. And Q Business can, I believe, answer questions not just about the structured data, but also it indexes unstructured data all over the system. I don't know the full scope of what that index is, but the point is they are trying to merge both. And so all of a sudden, AWS goes from essentially being a set of building blocks to having a very coherent data platform. And one other thing that I should mention is that just like the other vendors, there's metadata that belongs to each of these engines, but as the users interact with the data, the metadata itself gets smarter about what's there. And so the first thing, this was the first instance that I had heard about from a vendor where you would have potentially a deep research style interaction paradigm with your data, where you could ask a question and it could follow up with clarification, and then it could do multi-hop queries to, in other words, it would answer a question, find out if it didn't get all the data that was needed, either ask for clarification or then execute more queries. That's like the deep research that we see like in the Gemini and OpenAI products, only now for structured data. And that sounded very advanced. And it's that pattern that allows the system to get smarter about the data based on how the user interacts with it.
So high level of simplifying with frameworks, while at the same time preserving access to those primitives if developers so desire. Okay, finally, let's take a look at the Salesforce approach, something that we have dug into pretty extensively with their engineering team, George on his own, George and myself with Mark Benioff. Salesforce is transforming from a traditional SaaS suite into a software-only hyperscaler in our view. They anchor on Customer 360 in Data Cloud. They wrap it with Tableau metrics and the Trino query fabric. And they're letting Agentforce LLM agents trigger actions back into core CRM apps. And in addition, they're trying to federate data from wherever it lives, whether that's Snowflake or Databricks or any other platform, positioning them as partners, not competitors. George, how should we think about Data Cloud in this example? You've got it in green where the system of intelligence was in our first slide. Is this that high value real estate that we've been talking about? What role does MuleSoft play in terms of integration? How should we think about the implications of packaging agents that execute workflows, what you termed service as software, as opposed to software as service? And will Salesforce pricing change? In other words, will they aim, and that could have effects across the entire industry. You mentioned SAP before. Will they aim to monetize outcomes, not just seat licenses?
Yeah, all a bunch of great questions. Okay, let me point out one thing about this slide. You do not see here data. There's we've in every era we have infrastructure, platform, and applications. And the reason why Salesforce is not 100% competitor to Snowflake and Databricks is that they view the data as infrastructure. And you can see even that's why the Trino open source query engine is not how they're defining their value add. Their value add is one level above the infrastructure or data, which is the model. That's the data cloud. It's a model of the customer 360 profile and their engagement journey. And it's mostly in metadata. And that is what allows them to answer the questions: what happened, why did something happen, what's likely to happen, and what should we do? And metrics are a part of that. But the reason I say data is not there is they've built their system so that their data cloud so that it can work with zero copy. In other words, they can go to Snowflake or Databricks or other systems and query on the fly the data they need that lies in these other systems. Their value is this system of intelligence that models the customer's engagement journey and profile. And They call it zero copy. They can cache it, they can query it, they can federate the query. Some data might stream in. But again, this is crucial. In the age of AI, data programs your models. And so you separate the model from the data. And that's what's in Data Cloud. It's the 4D map of how to present the data to your agents. And then the agents can make decisions, and then they can operationalize those decisions through the Customer 360 apps that Salesforce has, as well as, this is crucial, MuleSoft gave them a way to manage the APIs to the legacy data and application estate. But Informatica, what I don't think Wall Street fully appreciates, they think it's more of Salesforce going back to their empire building ways. But it's actually really strategic. Informatica gives a way to sort of excavate and present the logic and data that's buried in the legacy application and data estate. So MuleSoft puts these interfaces on it, but I think the role of Informatica will be to excavate and present that logic and data so that where I left these two blank spots in the systems of intelligence and system of agency, those can be filled out partly by Salesforce and partly by the ecosystem. The goal here, as MK made clear to us on the last interview we did with him and Alice Steinglass, MK is the head of engineering for Platform and Agentforce. They did the customer 360 and engagement journey not to stop there, but to jumpstart the fact that you could model more and more of your enterprise this way. They did the hard work for the customer stuff with the hope that the ecosystem and to some extent Salesforce, as they build out their verticals, can extend this to other areas. And then with MuleSoft and Informatica, then that's a way of using the systems of record to operationalize the decisions and the actions that the agents take outside of the Salesforce ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. That's the number one criticism on Salesforce is it's a part of this walled garden. Informatica takes them further away from that and gives them access to other platforms and furthers their integration agenda. All right, let's close with a look at some of the potential platform wars that are emerging. In this ETR heat map, we show net score again, spending velocity on the vertical axis by overlap or account penetration on the horizontal. And we've just sort of cherry picked a few platforms here. This is a nuance of the ETR model. We didn't select any specific domain, so these are just sort of the overall platforms. AWS and Azure, you can see, have solidified their position in the upper right. Google remains the only hyperscaler with a true foundation model. That's a claim that it makes, and I think it makes it fairly. We'll see how critical that becomes in terms of integration and performance and competitiveness. Salesforce is looking, as you said, in our view, to become a software-only hyperscaler, the fourth hyperscaler, if you will, US-based anyway, and is making inroads with Data Cloud and its integration strategy. We'll see what happens with Informatica. Meanwhile, ServiceNow and others like Palantir are harmonizing data within their own estates. And then there are Snowflake and Databricks. We always come back to those two. Since the advance of the modern data stack, these two firms have been battling for data platform supremacy and are now entering new territory. George, we also show Celonis on this chart with plans to go across applications with an agentic platform. You referenced SAP before, not wanting to give access to its data to the likes of Celonis, and it's created a lawsuit. The market is huge, perhaps plenty big, where it's not a zero-sum game and it's not a winner-take-all, but there will be winners, and there will be winners that are even bigger and even some losers. So how do you see it playing out? We'll give you the final word.
I think you alluded to something that was really important, which was SAP not wanting to share, let's say with Celonis, or making it difficult to share the event logs. The key point is this system of intelligence and the system of agency that you build on top of that, it very fundamentally changes the value of these applications. Today, they're priced either on a consumption or slash utility basis or a seat basis. But when you get into systems of intelligence and agency, you're directly affecting the outcomes of a business. You're delivering not software, but you're delivering a business service. For instance, you're not delivering call center software, but you're delivering customer service like a call center itself. And so the pricing model is going to change from something, again, like seat-based and consumption-based to something closer to business outcomes. And by business outcomes, you could see something like an Instacart or an Uber when it offers its fleet management software to other vendors. They are directly in the cost of goods sold of their customer. Now, I'm not sure that that's going to happen with service as software, which is what we're describing, this combination of system of intelligence and systems of agency. That has all sorts of risk implications and difficulties potentially in measuring with your customers, but you will see something closer to value-based pricing. And since you're moving again from sort of automating functionality to delivering business services and charging closer to value, the TAM expansion is 1 or 2 orders of magnitude beyond just traditional enterprise software. So the prize for making this transition is tremendous, but there's huge technical hurdles because, as we saw, going from having a catalog of analytic artifacts to having a dynamic 4D map that is a model of how your business operates, that is a profound technical challenge, and it's going to take us years to get there. But I think by looking at it from that perspective, we can make better sense out of what vendors are doing today.
Well, it's a good dose of reality with all this agent washing that's going on. We're big fans, but we do recognize the challenges to both technically and the business inertia. I think many customers still are grappling with what the next step is and what the direction is. George, I got to go to CUBE Pod. Thank you so much. It's great working with you as always.
Always great to collaborate, Dave. This was fun, and we will be able to do a recap after the data platform conferences to calibrate where we were.
100%, and I'll see you next week at Snowflake Summit. John Furrier is up in Seattle doing an AWS halftime report, mid-year assessment. He's got sit-downs with Matt Garman and all the executives. The following week, we're at the Databricks Data Plus AI Summit. We're at the AWS DC Summit. theCUBE continues on the road. I want to thank Alex Myerson, who's on production and manages the podcast, and Ken Schiffman as well. Kristen Martin and Cheryl Knight help get the word out on social media and in our newsletters, and Rob Hof is our EIC over at SiliconANGLE.com. Remember, all these episodes are available as podcasts wherever you listen. Just search Breaking Analysis Podcast. I publish each week on thecuberesearch.com and SiliconANGLE.com, and you can email me at david.vellante@SiliconANGLE.com or DM me at dvellante on Twitter, or comment on my LinkedIn post, and check out etr.ai for the best survey data in the enterprise tech business. This is Dave Vellante for theCUBE Research Insights, powered by ETR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Breaking Analysis.